Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're wading into some pretty challenging waters.
Yeah, definitely a tough subject. We're going to be exploring that tragic Air India Boeing 787 crash from 2025.
Exactly, and we're doing it through the lens of one specific piece of writing, one source.
That's right. It's an article titled Air India Dreamliner Crash, Demanding Answers. And it's basically the foundation for our conversation today.
And it's interesting, this article kind of tells you up front what it's trying to do, doesn't it?
It does. It says it wants to unpack this whole complex tragedy for, the everyday reader, aiming for clarity.
Based on research, fact checks, names, locations, dates, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. And they also mention, which caught my eye, trying to weave in some humor or sarcasm.
Which feels a bit bold, maybe, for such a grim topic.
A little, yeah. But the article claims it's an attempt to keep you engaged while dealing with, well, some very dark facts.
Okay. So our mission then for this deep dive is to walk through this source together.
Yep.
We'll pull out what it highlights as the key info, try to get a handle on what happened, what the source thinks might have caused it.
And really importantly, what the article argues needs to be done now.
We'll try to make the complex bits understandable and point out maybe some surprising things the source brings up.
All right, let's jump in. How does the article set the scene?
It starts with this really devastating snapshot. It describes the plane, an Air India Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, about 11 years old.
So not brand new, but not ancient either.
Right. The source gives the figures around 41,000 flying hours, about 8,000 takeoffs and landings. It had seen some service.
And then the crash itself, the description is just awful.
Yeah, it says shortly after takeoff, the plane just lost altitude, plummeted.
No slow descent, just
Batted.
a rapid fall, yeah. Horrifying.
And the impact location, the article really stresses this point, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It didn't crash in some remote field. It came down right in a densely populated area.
And it mentions hitting a college hostel. Yes, full of medical students. The source calls it a cruel irony, people training to save lives caught in this, and others just, on the streets nearby.
The scale of the tragedy just immense. Lives lost on the plane, lives lost on the ground.
The article frames it as one of India's worst recent aviation disasters, a huge blow.
But the source makes an important observation early on regarding how the plane came down.
It does. It notes there was no evidence the plane broke apart in the air.
Which is crucial, right?
Very, because the source uses that to suggest that, at least initially, things like mid-air bombs or, terrorism seem less likely. It helps narrow the focus.
Okay, so that immediately shifts attention elsewhere. And the article does seem to shift focus pretty quickly, particularly towards the manufacturer.
Yes, Boeing comes under the microscope.
Yeah.
The 787 Dreamliner is described as, their pride and joy,
Yeah.
a real flagship plane.
But then the article immediately puts that in context by talking about Boeing's recent track record, the problems in 2024, 2025. Right, it reminds you about those incidents, doors coming off mid-flight, serious issues with landing gear.
It even mentions a specific belly landing incident with a South Korean 737-800.
Yeah, hitting a wall, I think. So it paints a picture of a company already facing scrutiny before this crash.
And the source highlights the grim significance here. This is the very first fatal crash involving a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner.
That's a massive point. A previously spotless safety record for this specific model, now broken. Huge implications for Boeing and the Dreamliner program.
The article even briefly touches on wider safety concerns, mentioning issues with Boeing's spacecraft side of things, too.
Just a brief mention, yeah, but it adds to this picture of a company facing challenges on multiple fronts.
And it goes back to the specific plane involved, 11 years old, 41,000 hours. You mentioned the source's analogy.
Oh, yeah, likening it to a middle-aged uncle potentially needing a checkup. A bit dark, but memorable. It's trying to say it's not new, not old, but has a history.
Which naturally leads to the big questions the article poses.
Exactly. Was it a maintenance issue, something specific to Air India's procedures, or was it a deeper design flaw in the Boeing aircraft itself?
Something else entirely.
Right. And the source is firm. The real answers are going to come from the black box.
Which it points out is actually orange, funnily enough.
Yeah. Always worth remembering. That, plus the maintenance logs, plus a really thorough investigation by the experts, that's where the truth lies, not in guesswork.
Before getting too deep into the technical side, though, the article does something important. It pauses.
It does, and it's necessary. It prompts reflection on the human cost. which is easy to forget when you're talking technical details.
Reminding us these aren't just statistics, these were people.
Passengers on the plane, yeah.
Yeah.
Individuals with families, stories, futures, all gone.
And it brings us back again to that horrific scene on the ground, those medical students.
The source really emphasizes the potential loss there. Young people dedicating their lives to helping others.
Their futures just extinguished.
And the other people just, living their lives on the street, caught up in it.
It's a powerful point. The source makes the ripples go far beyond the crash site itself. It tears holes in families, communities.
Leaves scars. And the article's perspective seems to be that understanding why this happened is fundamental.
Not just a technical exercise.
No, it's about honoring those victims, making sure lessons are learned, changes are made, so it never ever happens again. Their loss has to mean something.
Okay, so moving from that human cost, let's tackle the really complex part. The potential causes. Why did this happen? The source itself says this is where it gets murkier.
Yeah, the clear facts run out and the possibilities start multiplying. It circles back first to what seems ruled out mid-air explosion, terrorism.
And it throws a bit of shade at the instant online theories, right?
A little sarcastic jab, yeah, about the ex-conspiracy theorists jumping to conclusions.
Fair enough. What about the crew? The pilot?
The article mentions the commander had significant experience, 8,000 flying hours.
So the source suggests a simple rookie mistake is probably unlikely.
Less likely, yeah. Though it doesn't completely rule out human factors in a more complex sequence of events, experience doesn't mean immunity to error under pressure.
So what possibilities are on the table, according to the source? What are investigators likely looking at?
A whole range. Could it be a major mechanical failure, something breaking unexpectedly?
Or maybe an error in maintenance?
Yeah.
Something missed or done incorrectly?
That's definitely a possibility they'd investigate. Or specific problems with the engines or the landing gear, particularly critical during takeoff.
Even something small, like a sensor.
Yeah, a faulty sensor giving bad information to the pilots or the flight systems. That's happened before.
And external factors. Weather.
The source mentions Mother Nature's cameo. Could a sudden, severe weather event have played a part? It has to be considered.
And then there's the human element again.
Always. Fatigue, training issues, a split-second decision under immense stress,
Yeah.
all potential contributing factors.
The timing seems crucial too, happening right after takeoff.
Hugely important. The source stresses this. It's a high workload phase, very little altitude, very little time to react if something goes wrong. The margins are thin.
And the article raises another angle, the airport itself.
Yeah, this is interesting. It asks if the departure airport might have posed challenges. It draws a comparison to places like Kozhikode, the tabletop airport.
Suggesting things like runway length or the approach path or maybe infrastructure could be relevant.
Exactly. It's not blaming the airport, but saying investigators need to look at everything. Was the runway long enough? Was the infrastructure adequate for this size of aircraft, maybe in specific conditions?
The source is pretty insistent on a thorough investigation, isn't it? And clear answers.
Very. It demands meticulous work and clarity for the public, no jargon, no hiding behind technical terms.
And it makes a specific comparison to a previous Boeing crisis.
Yes, the 737 MAX crashes linked to the MSCS software. The article explicitly says investigators need to consider if a software glitch or a design issue, like with the MAX, could be involved here.
Given Boeing's recent history, the source implies that question absolutely has to be asked.
Can't be ignored, yeah.
Okay, hearing all this. Potential failures, design flaws, crashes, it definitely makes you nervous about flying.
Totally understandable. And the source anticipates that exact reaction. It asks the question directly. Is flying still safe?
And what's its answer?
Despite this horror, the article says statistically, yes, overwhelmingly safer than, say, driving on an Indian highway, which is the comparison it uses.
Does it give numbers?
It does. Something like 0.07 fatalities per billion passenger miles for air travel versus a shocking 7.3 for road travel.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It is. The source uses that slightly jarring analogy. You're apparently far more likely to be hit by an auto rickshaw than die in a plane crash.
Memorable, I guess.
If a bit grim. But the point is clear. Statistics are cold comfort, the article admits, especially when you see crash images.
Of course.
But the overall conclusion it presents is firm. Flying generally remains the safest mode of long-distance travel.
Okay, so after the crash, what happens next? The investigation process, the source calls it CSI meets aviation.
Yeah, something like that. It outlines this complex multi-agency effort. You've got India's DGCA, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, leading the probe.
And because it's a Boeing plane, the U.S. NTSB gets involved.
Correct. The National Transportation Safety Board will participate, plus likely other international experts too.
And what are the steps they take? What does the source say they actually do?
Well, number one is analyzing those black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. Again, noting they're orange and built tough.
In the paperwork.
Mountains of it. Combing through every maintenance record for that specific plane, interviewing everyone involved, ground crew, mechanics, air traffic control, maybe witnesses.
It sounds like a massive job, just trying to piece together those final moments.
Monumental. Figure out the exact sequence of events and, crucially, the root cause, or maybe multiple causes.
And the source suggests the potential findings could point in several directions.
Right. It could be a design flaw with the Dreamliner itself. It could be a maintenance slip-up by Air India. Or it could be something else, bird strike, software failure, human factors under pressure. All possibilities until proven otherwise.
Stepping back a bit, the article then puts this crash into a broader context, doesn't it? The state of aviation today.
It does. It talks about the huge boom in air travel after the pandemic, especially in places like India.
Airlines like Indigo, Air India ordering hundreds of new planes, massive growth.
But then the source raises the potential downsides of that rapid growth. Are airports stretched too thin? Is air traffic control juggling too many planes?
Are manufacturers rushing production?
That's the concern at Voices. Is there pressure that might lead to corners being cut in manufacturing, maintenance, training? Is safety taking a back seat sometimes to profit and expansion?
It contrasts this crash slightly with another recent one, the Azerbaijan Airlines incident.
Yeah, Dima Help mentions that one, which seemed to involve external factors, possibly mistaken identity, shot down. But it suggests this Air India crash feels more internal.
Meaning the cause is likely within the plane's systems, maintenance, or operation.
That seems to be the initial sense the article conveys, yeah. Less likely an external attack, more likely something went wrong with the flight itself.
And this whole context, rapid growth, potential stress on the system, leads into the article's big call to action at the end.
Exactly. It lays out what it believes absolutely needs to happen now.
And number one is transparency, right?
Absolutely number one. The source demands the investigation be wide open. No cover-ups, no blaming pilots without solid evidence, no corporate spin from Boeing or Air India. Accountability is key.
If fault is found, someone needs to be held responsible.
That's the message. Second, it calls for stronger regulatory action.
From India's DGCA.
Yes. Tighten the screws, review safety protocols for all airlines in India, audit airports, ATC, maintenance standards, maybe even rethink those tricky tabletop airports.
Third point.
Supporting the human element. Pilots and crew need support systems, good training, not just blame when things go wrong.
And finally, honoring the victims.
Yeah. Ensuring their loss drives real change, maybe through memorials, scholarships, but fundamentally through a renewed, rock-solid commitment to safety above all else.
The source really hammers home that flying should be safe, and everyone has a role in demanding that.
Airlines, manufacturers, regulators, even passengers, it suggests, need to demand the highest standards.
And the article, just briefly, it reflects on its own slightly unusual style with the humor and sarcasm.
Just a quick note on that, yeah. Acknowledging it's trying to balance engaging the reader with discussing a very grim reality while aiming for clarity.
Okay, so let's zoom out, this deep dive into the source. We've covered the horrific crash scene, the context around Boeing's troubles.
The immense human cost, both on the plane and tragically on the ground.
We've explored the whole range of potential causes the article lays out: mechanical, maintenance, human factors, the airport.
Address that vital question of whether flying is still safe, looking at the statistics versus the emotional impact.
We've outlined the investigation process and put this tragedy in the bigger picture of a fast-growing aviation industry.
And importantly, we've highlighted that strong call to action from the source: transparency, tougher regulation, supporting crews, and honoring victims through safety commitments.
It really shows how complex these events are, doesn't it? So many factors involved.
From tiny sensors to huge industry trends, yeah. Everything is interconnected.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really, prompted by this source material. As air travel keeps expanding, especially in places like India,
How do we make absolutely sure that speed and growth don't compromise safety, that non-negotiable need for safety?
and what's our role as passengers, as observers, in holding everyone accountable for getting people safely from A to B?
It's a heavy question, and one that hangs in the air while everyone waits for answers from this investigation.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material on the Air India Dreamliner crash.